I have a small request. Can you please mute your cell phones or switch them off in case they are ringing with you? Thank you. Welcome to the conference, or rather a stimulating discussion on professionalizing and growing multi-generational ventures organized by Entrepreneurship and Venture Capital Club. I'm Tamas Mitani, Chair of Family Business and Wealth Management. The conference will focus on the family businesses and how to carve out a niche and to grow your business in a professional manner. The discussion will try to elucidate the same with real-life examples from some of the most successful and multi-generational family-run organizations. We believe that the reviving Indian economy will throw a number of opportunities for entrepreneurs to grow their organizations multi-fold. And so we are involving some of the very successful organizations such as Dr. Reddy Laboratories, Apollo Hospitals Group, and GMR Group, along with one of the largest consultants to family-run organizations, Arthur D. Little, to highlight their experience in operating and growing in such a challenging and growing environment. Again, I welcome you all to the conference, and now I request Dean Ajit Rangnekar to deliver the welcome address. Thank you.
Thank you, good afternoon, and welcome once again, I hope, for many of you to the ISB. These days I have to admit that I try not to be the inaugural speaker for most events, simply because I think there is a wealth of real talent at this school that we need to showcase and not the same old me. But today's is a very special Triveni Sangam for me. Three of the things closest to my heart have come together today, and therefore I could not miss the opportunity to be here. Entrepreneurship and the Entrepreneurship Club is obviously something that is very, very dear to our hearts at the ISB. The second thing is family businesses. Very few institutions focus on the subject of family businesses. While in India, for all practical purposes, almost all companies are really family businesses. Whether you start with Reliance, you go to Bajaj, Hero Honda, for that matter Airtel, they are all in reality, while they are public limited companies, they are to a great extent family-owned companies. And the third reason, of course, is this is also the launch of Solstice, our great homecoming every year for our alumni. And that always is an extremely emotional moment for us. So I'm very delighted to be here. Let me just take a couple of minutes and talk about family businesses, especially generational issues of family businesses. By the way, I happen to have spent 7 years of my life working in a family business, and where there was a generational change issue. And then as a part of my consulting, I also did a fair amount of consulting in Hong Kong and China with same kind of issues of transformation and of family businesses. And in most cases, we look at these transformational issues from the point of view of professionals. But what I found fascinating was the point of view of the next generation family person. And believe you me, having seen and sat next to such people, they are the people who face some of the biggest challenges. First of all, they come in after a huge father figure who has started the company. So there is a big image issue to deal with. Second is that they have to now deal with the whole host of old timers who have been with the company, with the father, and who treat you like a kid. What do you know? You're a kid. Right? The third thing is transforming something that somebody else has created and in whom somebody else has invested in enormous emotional energy into a different organization is a big challenge. And I think we saw a very fascinating case of that just 2 days ago, when Rahul Bajaj came out publicly to say that he was very disappointed and heard that his son Rajiv was shutting down the scooter. It's a classic case of a father still having a strong emotional involvement in an organization which he has for all practical purposes handed over to his son. And it was left to poor Rajiv, and I must say that while I am a very close personal friend of Rahul Bhai, my heart went out to Rajiv that, when he came out and said, I know, but I have to take decisions based on cold, hard facts and future growth of the company rather than on emotions. So the second generational leaders face many different challenges. They have to carve out a niche for themselves without really throwing away the legacy. They still have to maintain the family relations. They still have to be respectful to the people who were there earlier, many of whom have outlived their professional lives. So it's fascinating today that we are seeing 3 second generational leaders, and it will be wonderful to hear from them what their responses have been, how they have faced up to some of these issues. So welcome here. I would like to thank our speakers, 2 of whom are here and 2 of whom will come a little later, for joining us as always. At ISB, we are always delighted to have great speakers who come and share their perspectives with us. I'm sure that today we'll have a great evening of learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajit. And thank you all for joining us on this Friday afternoon for a coffee conversation with Prof. Ram and 4 illustrious business people. Professor Kawal Ramachandran, or Prof. Ram as he's fondly known, is a brand name in himself. Prof. Ram has been an academic since 33 years. He obtained his PhD from the Cranfield School of Management, UK in 1986. He was then a professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, for 14 years. Then he moved to the Indian School of Business when it was established in 2001. So he's been a pioneer here. Currently, Prof. Ram is the Thomas Schmidheiny Chair Professor of Family Business and Wealth Management at ISB. Prof. Ram has done extensive research, consulting and training in the broad area of family business. This includes 2 major research projects on professionalization of family businesses in India, and he's also been co-directing a training program on perpetuating family businesses at ISB since 2003. He has been a consultant to several growth companies on professionalizing and perpetuating their family businesses as well. He's also been on the various advisory committees of the Government of India, World Bank, Securities and Exchange Board of India on entrepreneurship and strategy. I've personally had the privilege of knowing Prof. Ram since April this year. What this phenomenal bio doesn't tell you is that Prof. Ram is a rare mentor who can fuse inspiration with pragmatism. He's a true listener and educator. He must have enabled hundreds of students in realizing their dreams, either entrepreneurial or otherwise. He is wisdom personified. Please join me in warmly welcoming Prof. Ram for this coffee conversation.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. That's good. Another round of warm welcome to you to ISB and to this session, informal chat session with 4 of the great industrial leaders who have huge background, very tremendous experience in the family business context. Before going on to the format of the afternoon, let me also tell you a little bit about the context in which ISB is organizing this. Can you hear me there? Yes? Yes. Okay, very good. As Ajit said, the family business is so critical to the Indian economy's development, past, present and future. And we are undergoing huge round of transformation, not only on the total economic side, but also on the family business side. A lot of changes are happening, not only in terms of the succession issues, but also professionalization, governance, a variety of things. So ISB has been doing a lot of work in this area, and we are one of the pioneers to take advantage of this opportunity and take responsibility on ourselves to work in this area. And it is in this context that Dr. Thomas Schmidheiny, whose family is the largest shareholder of the Holcim Group, the building materials company from Switzerland. They have generously donated money to set up this chair. So we have been doing work in this area for a few years now. Variety of things that we have done. One is we are doing a lot of research. And I would say that there are not many people who are doing research on family business in India. 2-3 areas there where I am working now. I am leading the research in ISB. One is understanding the structure, context, contribution, status of family business in India across large groups, medium-sized companies. It's a huge exercise. We don't have a database of family businesses in the country. That's one. And that itself will give us a lot of insight into what's happening, what's likely to happen. The second area is professionalization. Wherever I go, whomever I meet, particularly medium-sized companies, even to large companies, the challenge is professionalization. It's not only about recruiting non-family executives into the company, but also ensuring that the transactions, the interactions, the discussions are professionally conducted. Again, going back to the point about Rahul versus Rajiv, the question is whether the decision was taken by the family or by the board. Whether Rahul Bajaj likes it or Rajiv wanted to have a change. It is the board ultimately to decide. So there are issues like that. It's not only about the chief executive, it's only also about the board. Professionalization that level. Yet another area where we are working is governance. Governance within the company as well as governance within the family. Unless there is huge quality, high quality of governance within the family, you will not be able to achieve whatever you want. And the 3 families that we are having here, the GMR family, the Apollo family, as well as the Dr. Reddy's family, they have grown so rapidly within a short period of time. Primarily, one of the basic reasons is the high quality of governance they have been able to develop and sustain within the families. So, the final thing is that there will be 2 other areas where we are working. One is we have an annual program on family business, which we call the Perpetuating the Family Enterprise, with Professor John Ward from Kellogg. John is considered as the guru of family business. He has been working in this area for the past 30 years across the world. He is one of the most sought after figures in this. And we are fortunate to have his guidance, his involvement, his direction in this program. Since for the past 4 or 5 years, we have been organizing this program every October. Then we have a course for our own students. This year it has become a full-fledged, full credit course. The final part is for the past 2 years, we have organized a major international conference, Asian International Conference on Family Business. It has been tremendous success. We have been having full house. The entire auditorium has been full. 2008 we started. 2009 we had the second conference. Unfortunately, we will not be having it next year. We'll have it in 2011. So we are taking a break. But we didn't want to, I could not keep quiet, so to say, without having some conference to catch up with the people, with the families around. So we decided to have a mini conference. That's what we are going to have it. And instead of having formal sessions, we thought we will have more of informal interaction. There is no media, by the way. So it's an open house, free interaction, free-wheeling discussions are possible. The format, we have 2 rounds of coffee with me. The first round is going to be, I like to drink 2 cups of coffee. First round is going to be with Kiran Granthi. Kiran is the chairman of the airports business of the GMR Group. As all of you know, the GMR Group has come from almost nowhere, out of the blue. It's now 4,000 crores plus revenue. It's tremendously growing. Last year's annual compound growth rate was 55% or somewhere there. They are into infrastructure, and if you go back to GMR's own background, he started from nowhere as a small-time trader manufacturer in Rajam. That's the place where he comes from. It's a small place. So now they are into infrastructure. Before coming into infrastructure, they had moved GMR and the family. And the group itself had explored several businesses, and now their focus is on infrastructure, variety of infrastructure, every aspect of infrastructure they are present. And Kiran is one of the thinking brains. The others are thinking, but Kiran is one of the master brains within the family. Kiran has been instrumental in terms of fundraising in a big way, including divestment, which is a bold decision, especially when they were holding major stake in the Russia Bank. He was instrumental in that. He led the discussion, he led the initiative in terms of 3 of the airport projects, the Hyderabad airport, Delhi airport modernization, and finally the Istanbul airport reconstruction in Turkey. They have just completed that project, and Kiran is a man who is after execution, not only plan but also execution. So we'll spend time discussing with Kiran as to how he has been able to execute so successfully many of these projects. Along with him, we have the other speaker is Mr. Thomas Kuruvilla. Thomas is the managing director of Aadhar Delhi, one of the most respected, largest consulting companies in the world. He is the managing director of ADL for the Middle East and Asia. And he is also an expert on strategy and organization. He is directing their strategy organization practice in, I think, Hong Kong to Middle East, the entire belt. And he has worked in Asia, all over the world. So as a consultant, currently his focus is Middle East, and as you know, Middle East is full of family businesses. There's nothing without family business there. So we'll have one round of chat discussion with Thomas and Kiran, and then afterwards we have 2 other speakers coming. One is G. Prasad, he is the head chairman and managing director of Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. Then Shobhana Kabineni, she is the executive director of the Apollo Hospitals Group. So we'll have it in the second round. This is the format we have. We'll be sitting here discussing. It's more of an interactive session, but we would like to have your involvement. You may have received a few slips of paper to write your questions. Please do start writing your questions right now when we start the discussion. Our volunteers will come and collect it. Some of those will be screened. Some of them we will not have time to respond to all the questions. And what we are going to do is to select some of the more relevant questions and try to respond within the period available. And I shall try to get some of the responses later if possible, and get it at the site, at our website later. So with those opening notes, I would now like to request Kiran and Thomas to come on stage.
Kiran, let me start with you. First of all, congratulations on completing the Istanbul airport. I suppose within the record time?
I would say, yeah, so 12 months ahead.
12 months ahead of schedule. Please give it a big applause. And within the budgeted amount, I suppose.
Within budgeted,
Yeah,
I would say slightly less.
slightly less. Okay. So this is not the first time. This is the nth time, I would say. Every infrastructure project that you have had, I suppose that's happened. And
Most of the projects.
most of the projects.
Because we do have some package, but very less.
Very less.
Very less.
Yeah, what was the record with the Hyderabad airport?
Hyderabad is within the budget.
Within the budget.
Within the budget, and say 5 months.
5 months ahead of schedule. I hope you can hear it there. No? You Is it on?
I think it's on. Yeah. Hyderabad is, okay. We've done it within the budget, Hyderabad Airport. We have done, we were supposed to complete by September 1st, 2000, but we did it 5 months ahead. We had a goal that we have to complete ahead of Bangalore. That's been our, even though our corporate headquarters is in Bangalore, but we come from here, we said we should complete ahead of Bangalore. But the background is that, Hyderabad project planning, bidding process started 1 year after Bangalore was started. So we were actually lagging behind.
So how did you manage to do it? See, one of the reasons why I'm asking is that you look at any strategy. Strategy is fantastic. Formulation is great. Everybody can prepare a strategic plan. But when it comes to execution, most people fail. There's always a time over and cost over, and you blame the government, you blame the contractor, you blame the subcontractor, everybody, except us. Okay. So how did you manage to do that? I mean, I think that everybody would be likely interested.
One of the culture we built father built from the first project. So the way we entered into infrastructure 95 by entering into the first top line in Tamil Nadu 2 years ago. So that was my project, and I was a management trainee. So the philosophy has been that you have to have very close touch with the reality, have a close pulse with interaction with most of the employees, who are involved in the project, subcontractors, contractors.
How do you do that?
You
have only 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I agree. So we have a very rigorous weekly reviews, very rigorous, and we review right to the smallest issues, right, and also to the biggest issues. We review it on a weekly basis, and the team does it on they have their own interface meeting, which does on a very regular basis, supporting me or supporting father also, the group chairman also reviews it very closely. All the greenfield projects are reviewed very closely. So we have a supporting team which keeps track of all these things. It goes down like a helicopter, right down and also, horizontal. There are 4 stages of our project. Like we have the bidding stage, the construction phase, the development phase, the construction phase, and operation phase. Each phase we complete, the project's value is enhanced by roughly 25%. So the moment you commission the project, when you completed the Hyderabad Airport, that means 75% of the value has been created. So an operation phase is the balance 25 to 30% of the value of what you envisage during the bidding process. So we focus, like the family and also the group holding board, we focus all the greenfield projects, all the high value projects very closely, right from the top to the bottom. We review very closely, and that has been the culture from the first project till the last. And even the next big one is Delhi Airport, which is want to complete it by March end and commission it by July 1st week next year before the Commonwealth. So that has been the philosophy, and what we do is that we have a strong reviews, and we have a strong, I would say, resource mobilization. When you say resource, it is both finance and people. When we look at when we ever started the business in 85, 90% of our employees are from Andhra. Today, if you look at our demographic of our people, it is multinational. We have people from Andhra, people from all over India, are also expatriates working in our organization. So we have the right person in the right job and also recruit them in early in the time. So that's the second focus. We focus very highly on the resource. The third is the risk management. We focus enterprise risk management. It's not very theoretical risk management. It is done with the people within the organization. We ask them, each department, we ask them okay, you know what is issues in your table now, but why don't you anticipate what is going to come in 6 months time or 12 months time and just put it on the table now and discuss about it. So we have a very strong risk management process in the organization and also in each project we do, so that these three are the major things we do. And supporting these three, we have a business integration team, which is collecting data, tracking it, and supporting all our CMA.
Okay. Did you, I mean, if I remember right, in one instance you instead of cargoing it, you had lifted some parts to compress time or something?
Yes,
there may be many instances like
this
this.
is not our equipment. Most of our equipment for Hyderabad Airport has arrived early. This is an equipment which was to be procured by one of the government agencies, which is very critical, which is the ATC tower equipment. If ATC is not there, you can't land at it. So, but that is a problem. It's not in our control, but it is within our government control. So what we said to government is that, okay, the equipment is lying, by the time you bring it to us, it takes 6 weeks. So we said we will sponsor the entire cost of everything. So we, even though it's not our responsibility, we ensure that we go over more than expected. But ultimately, the person who gets affected is the project, and maybe don't commission it in the right time. You wouldn't have, you might have some other problems going forward. If we have commissioned by September 1st, 2008, as per the old schedule, looking back, you would have had problems because the economic crisis started coming down and the economic crisis was there. So if the economic crisis was there, shifting the airport from the Begum-Beg to Samshabad we would have had some more issues. But so we said, if you set a deadline, we should achieve it by hook or crook. That's been our work culture.
I see. It's interesting. Thomas, when you are a major consultant with special focus in Middle East. Did you have similar kind of either groups or companies or experiences to share?
Sure. First of all, let me congratulate Kiran first, because it is very rare I have heard that people finish such large projects on time, on budget.
Yeah, but what was the total project cost of Hyderabad or Istanbul?
Istanbul is 350 million.
350 million. And
Hyderabad is also close.
So it's not a small project.
Yeah, for sure. So this is definitely a lot of learning. I will get free consulting from him and I will give it to my clients and charge money later. Yeah. So that's what consultants do all the time, right? Yeah. And the second thing I realized, second thing, just apology to the organizers. They asked me whether I want coffee. I said I will take water, and then I realized it's supposed to be coffee with Professor Ram. So I still have coffee here, right? There are definitely very large groups in the Middle East. The difference is it is not very prominent. The way the Middle East family groups market themselves or known to the outside world is very limited compared to what we see in other parts of the world. That is maybe one of their basic nature in the Middle East. And the second thing is the language issue. Many of the literature and their marketing material is in Arabic language, versus in India it is not even in our local language, it's in English. So even though there are comparable businesses in the Middle East and in India, the profile and what people know outside is very, very limited coming out of the Middle East for various reasons which I mentioned. Yeah. Going back to some of the success factors or why some of the family businesses have failed and not able to execute projects like what Kiran is mentioning, we clearly have to understand the difference between the Middle East and generally other family organizations that the issue or the benefits for family are a bit more exaggerated in the Middle East. Yeah. From the family side, here you have 1 wife and 2 to 3 children. In the Middle East, you will have 3 to 4 wives and 10 to 15 children. Okay? So the issues are just multiplied tenfold. And yeah. And if you look at the statistics of why some of the Middle East businesses have failed, majority of the reason is because the fight between the children of the different spouses. 90% of the reason. And in one of the successful companies that I have consulted with, they have a rule, documented corporate governance rule, that if you have 2 wives, your children cannot participate in the business. It's a documented rule.
Or 2 wives at the same time.
Yes. Officially. Yes. Yeah. So going back, and that is on the family side. The issues are much more exaggerated, right? And it is for you to make it beneficial or an issue. The issue is if you are not able to handle the children of multiple wives, and if you are not capable of putting in such philosophy saying that children cannot participate, then you can handle the situation. And the benefit is, many companies, you get many more family members to help you run the business. See, a constraint of a family-owned business is you don't have a lot of family members to run it. That is never the constraint in the Middle East. The second generation is already 15 people. Here you're struggling with 2, right? So the need of bringing in professional managers are much lesser in the Middle East. So that is on the family side, family control, how different is it in the Middle East and how you have to handle that. On the capital side, or I call it that you have to be very transparent if you want to run a business. Many geographies you try to be transparent because you need to arrange financing. Yeah, I want to get money from somebody, or I want to go to the IPO market and get money to finance the expansion of the family business. In the Middle East, capital is almost not a constraint. Even if you need money, it is almost got at a trust basis. You know, I trust my colleague, so we are very close friends. We trust each other. I don't have to give you numbers. We just trust each other, and I ask for $1 billion. He gives me, and when he needs it, if I have, I give it, and it is on a trust basis. The transparency about the business logic is not required to arrange money. But when you try to bring in professional managers, you need transparency. You see? So in all other geographies I have done consulting, you try to bring in transparency because you need to manage finances. You are a listed company, you have to share information externally, and when you want to bring in professional managers, it is already transparent and you can easily bring them. Here, you have to do that process to bring in professional managers, and you normally start late, and an external transparency is a much more serious issue which is forced upon you than being transparent to a professional manager. So it puts a very indirect pressure on you to tackle these issues, right? So the companies who have been successful are mostly who have been able to handle very clearly these issues of handling the family governance who has a very large family, and who have been able to make their processes, procedures, reporting extremely transparent, that you are able to bring in professional managers.
With other such cases of projects, because Middle East is full of projects.
Right.
Projects getting completed ahead of time, and with saving costs and time.
Rare, but there are absolute cases. And if I look at the multiple of my clients in which people who have been able to successfully complete projects on time, is again the way they manage the professional managers. Yeah, I have to be a bit politically correct here. The requirement of professional managers is much more severe in the Middle East because the absolute quality of people is at different levels. Yeah, you like it or you don't like it, that is a fact, right? So I have shared that with some of my clients. It's very painful, but that's a fact. For whatever reason, because people in the Middle East say that I have the right to leave, I have oil, and God has given me oil, I have to take oil and leave, and I have to leave freely, so I don't have to work hard. So I am not equally intelligent compared to people like in India or China who are struggling to live. So there is a basic pressure that they take on life, by which the development of people in the Middle East are little bit reduced compared to many other competitive, not even competitive, India, China, US, Europe, and all of them. And for them to bring in professional managers are extremely important. And coming back to whether somebody has managed projects on time, are the companies who have been able to bring in professional managers and at the same time manage them extremely well. Yeah, because the difficulty what I have seen in the Middle East is You bring in professional managers, you pay them for their intelligence, but you want them to work based on your instructions which doesn't require intelligence. You see, it's a contradiction. You pay, I want somebody to take responsibility of doing a project, I pay him $1 million. And for that type of work, to be intelligent and execute proactively looking at risk and all of that, he demands $1 million. He pays him $1 million, but he tells him what to do. If you want somebody to follow your instruction, you would have got him for $500,000. You see? And so everybody is frustrated. He said, he's taking $1 million from me, but he's just doing what I want him to do, but that is the way you have running the business. And these companies are always a failure. The owner is not smart. He brought in a professional manager. He tells him what to do. His intelligence is not allowed to play any role, and the project will never be successful. If I look at a project that is successful, there's a company called Astra. Owner is a guy called Sabir Masri. He owns almost half of Jordan, and maybe he owns 1/10 of Saudi Arabia. That is his profile of this person. Yeah. The way he runs business, he brings in professional managers. He puts in a perfect set of key performance indicators, objectives. He forces them to have a share in the company. If people say, I don't want share, you are not allowed in my company. It's mandatory for him to have a stake in the company, and then he doesn't interfere. If he interferes, he will pay fine. So if I interfere with a professional manager, he can charge a fine to the owner. I'm the owner, by the way, yeah? And I pay him a fine. Yeah? So he has taken it to the extreme of bringing in professional managers, giving them flexibility and not interfering, and this is one of the most successful family-run businesses in the Middle East, and this is one of the rare companies, it is rare in the Middle East, who have done very large projects on time, within budget, and again the professional manager gets to share the benefit.
Right. Okay, that raises interesting question too. I hope you don't have any such issues or such incentivizations. Okay. My question
may not be realizing.
Good.
I'm trying to sell some consulting here.
Yeah, but I have another interesting thing. My own understanding, based on understanding, you have a very cohesive team at the top. Whether it is your father, brother, brother-in-law, yourself, or non-family executives at the top, at the holding company, holding board, and then you have a large number of executives at the different levels. Okay, it requires a lot of building synergy. That cohesion, communication becomes very crucial. And I would say that it's not a static thing. Since you are moving so rapidly, it's a dynamic process. So the dynamic process of maintaining this cohesion, dynamic process of maintaining the synergy, both at the time of planning as well as execution, planning, review, execution. How do you manage? Can you explain this with some examples? I mean, since it is not an incentivization project where you are given a project, cash, incentive and asked them to do it. Here the approach is quite different. And they are working in different places, and in this case it doesn't become a silo. In that case these are silos. Right? So how do you manage this?
I think they want a big difference between doing project outside India and doing project within India. And outside India you can do projects, complexities, technological complexities would be loudly please. My understanding is that doing projects outside India, the outside interference would be minimum 20%, 25%. Means outside stakeholder interference, the outside change in the various parameters.
Even in Turkey, once it is finalized, you go ahead.
It is much more, our problems are more within our board, 70%. 30% you always have outside.
Uncontrollable.
Uncontrollable, which are not under your control. But in India, it's other way. It is 65 to 70%. You have to have constant engaging with the outside agencies, outside government interference, or even just to communicate, or just to bring them up to our speed, bring them to what we want to communicate, what we want to do. So the complexity is slightly different. So 65 to 70%, our job is more outside of our.
Right.
The technological complexity is is less compared. So therefore it makes more emphasis on family member to really focus on the outside issues and
Managing the environment.
manage the environment, and also try to insulate. The key thing is, we try to insulate the outside environment and what is happening inside the project now. So much so that, for example, for our Delhi airport, we have got 3 CEOs. There is one CEO looking after the large terminal 3, which is say largest top 5 in the world. We have one CEO just only focusing on the development of that, and another CEO just focusing on the running of the airport. And I have got a director. I call him as CEO External Affairs. So he is always outside the airport. He's also so much so that from he starts his job and he's always meeting different stakeholders and trying to solve the problem, because the thing is that the outside agencies are not time bound, but we are time bound. So therefore we have to be constantly after them and getting the work done, and also aligning themselves with us and ourselves. So therefore our focus is more on external agencies, but more and more as the organization has built those competencies as we went ahead. And also as an organization, when we, till 1999-2000, we were doing one project at a time.
Right.
From 2001 to 2005, we were doing projects all over South India. We were doing more projects in South India. 2005 to now, we're doing projects all over India, and also we've done one project in Istanbul. So what we've realized early in the game is that if you want to really compete, 99, 2000, 2001, we started the focus on organization development, focused on the software aspects of the organization. We realized that the real competitive advantage would be not just focus on projects, but also focus on the building our the organization, the people processes, the management breadth and also the depth. So we started doing it much earlier, almost 10 years. Because we started discussing. Initially, it was difficult to take people out of the projects. Let's have an offsite meeting. Let's have a discussion, a brainstorming on how to do projects in future. They'll say, my worry is handling today's problem. Why are you talking about future? So we've just bid for a road project, or we just bid for an airport project. So it is going to happen in 3 years. Why are you worrying about it? So let's deal with it when it comes. So, but we had those challenges, we had those debates, and we started slowly getting alignment at the top level. So when we started getting alignment at the top level, between the family members and we have 2-3 more independent professional directors, we started opening up the entire discussion to the senior leadership team. We today have a senior leadership team, almost 50-member team, where we constantly have engagement on a quarterly basis about where are we as a company, what are we doing, what are the challenges we're facing, what are the new ideas. We bring in various speakers from outside. So we started percolating, doing the alignment of various ideas, various projects, next place, not just at the family and also at the other professionals top, but close to family. We started doing it at the senior leadership level. So the buy-in is now much larger group. So that's a time-consuming process. But also, we're also very cautious that if you grow too much, then what happens is then we may not do projects as our standards. So we're very careful. So we don't jump into projects. We don't bid unrelated projects. We ensure that we do projects if we can deliver it. So that a lot of debate happens initially whether we have not just the financial capability, do we have the management capability also to execute these large projects. So we do debate that, and also we constantly discuss in the families how much pressure will come on the family also. So that is also been discussed when we do all this. When you decide any project.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to tell you that in case you have some questions, please do write. Our volunteers come and collect it. We'll continue the hold on. Continue the dialogue and Thomas, as a consultant, I find that this is a huge challenge they have addressed. I mean, when you are growing, the immediate challenge is day to day. Execute, execute, execute. Normally, we see people postponing planning part, postponing even some sort of a review and capability building is postponed. We want to get on with the work. So this is sort of an organization build-up. I mean, what you see is growth, then consolidation, growth kind of thing. This is consolidating on the run.
Right.
So do you find many organizations like this, either in the Middle East or anywhere else?
Yes, this is definitely it is there in every organization. You grow, consolidate, try to. When you're growing, you normally don't get the time to streamline your operations, and so it becomes a bit a facade, and things are done as and when it happens. And then you're trying to grow, then your growth itself is not correct, and you're going to lose money. You're not taking the right decisions. What we have started doing and tried implementing is, let us say we have a family business with multiple children or brothers. We clearly try to segregate the day-to-day operations and the long-term strategy and the firm building activity. Yeah, because if you put both of them together, always the short-term activities and firefighting will take dominance on top of the long-term thing. And it is very, very difficult because the brother who is always thinking about long-term will try to interfere in the short-term activity. So the short-term brother wants to always decide on what is happening in the company in the long term. Is it taking care of his interest or the brother running his own interest and all of that. But if you clearly are able to segregate and put some corporate policies driven from the father or the senior board person or by the board governance and segregate these two and have clear responsibilities between different parties on short term and long term, it can be addressed. Otherwise, it is almost impossible to address it. And that is how it has been done in cities.
I see, okay. It's another part of this point. I just wanted to get your response before I move on to this. This means that the quality of communication has to be phenomenal, and there should not be any misunderstanding, which is very difficult, especially when everybody is under pressure. And whether you are doing it, I am doing it, and normally I have seen it in the family businesses. As the growth happens, even the mid-size 100 crore, 50 crores families, I have seen that as the pressure builds up, relationship rupture, instead of seeing it positively, they are not able to control their emotions, they are not able to control the process because there is no process in place. And your case is much larger. So, and that too, another thing is that you used to live in Hyderabad, now in Delhi and Hyderabad and Bangalore. Okay, your father is in Bangalore. I think Srinivas was in Delhi, and the top team keeps traveling. So how do you manage to have communication? I mean, I agree there are mobile phones and other things are there, and also, let me just add to that. One of the things I have noticed is that when I ask the family members, they say that we are constantly in touch. They talk only about the minimum things required for the business. Nothing about the relationship, nothing about the things that are not happening, nothing about the assumptions. So if you have to build it up together, there is a need to have high quality communication. Do you have any success formula for this?
I think we started the communication between the family members early. Like I joined management training in 96, 98, but formally 98. So from 98 onwards, we had a very high level of communication between all the members. And my father is very active. Some of you must have met. He's very energetic, and if he hears something, he ensures that everybody is aware of that. So that one good quality we've learned from him is that as a constant communication to all the members, and he doesn't deprive one person from any important information comes out. So that's been the initial culture. Communication among all of us. So that culture has built up over the years. For example, even in the present high growth scenario environment, we ensure that every Saturday we have 1-2 hours discussions either through video conference or or in person, we ensure that we meet up virtually or in person once in.
And is there a fixed time?
There's a fixed time, on Saturday. There's a 2 hours, no agenda. So we just discuss and communicate. And then the formal agenda starts up. So we have a very, sometimes it is regimentary and sometimes it is, very painful because, we have to do it every week on basis. But it makes a lot of sense and it is worth it because only through communication, you could clear out most of the issues and have clarity and also we took a decision, like one other thing, family members getting involved in the operational level and moving strategic level. So 3-4 years back we were like that. We were very much into operational scenario. So then when we had one of the retreats, we discussed and we said we should slightly move back and have more professionals and then have CEOs running it, and we should become more into strategic. And the reason is that when you are family members are into operational mode, you tend to have more arguments, you tend to have more discussions, more issues. So we realized that, and if you see now we are more into strategic discussions and less of operation because most of the operational issues are dealt with professionals. So and that is a very important learning we have, is that the faster you shift into strategic mode, the better for the family and the business.
And do you have a policy that you would rotate among yourselves
We have
instead of creating silos?
Yeah, we do have a policy. Like for example, I started with corporate finance, new business development, and HR when I entered the business. Now, after doing all that, my father said, you should go do projects. You have too much, you become a consultant for it, you go and do projects. So that's when, actually I was against it. He said, no, you should do projects and then you get ground reality. So then he moved into doing the airport project. So, and the same thing happened to my brother. My brother did projects. He did the second power plant in Bangalore. So he is brought into finance. I moved into projects. And Srinivas, my brother-in-law, was moved into looking after the energy business. So we did have rotation, and then I think we had a third rotation 2 years back. So that is also helped in terms of aligning professionals. If one of the learning is if one family member runs one business for longer than required, all the professionals working in that organization are aligned with that person and not aligned with the organization. So when we start rotating, we felt that after first round of shift rotation, we start seeing some professionals readjusting themselves, and second time, third time. So it has become a routine, and then it makes every family member in touch with most of the professionals, and most of the professionals in having the chemistry and comfort with most of the family members. So that actually helps in the long term because then you start reducing politics when you have this way of rotating. But in short term, it does affect because in terms of relationship you develop in a sector, or knowledge you develop in a sector, it starts shaking up. So because the new person has to start all over again. So, but I guess that can be overcome by various other methods.
Yeah, this is interesting. Just to add one more thing. Mr. G.M.R. Rao, one of the key things he mentions is that you have to clean up the pipeline from time to time. Otherwise, then it will get clogged. Communication pipeline. He says that you have to keep communicating. You have to push for this. Don't hold back the feelings you have. And I think that was the beginning of writing the family constitution, building on the governance system within the family, and regular meetings and things like that. And I think that's very important. And also, otherwise, I would think that it would have been very difficult for you to shift from one business to another business because of this understanding that you have been able to build up.
We have 2 levels of offset. One is at the business level we have. Business level with the professionals we have the offset. But then we have the family level offset we do have. Earlier it used to be every 2 months, maybe 5 years back, but now it is once in 6 months. So if you have this offsite, it really helps in reflecting ourselves, and also in communicating and also clarifying somebody. Clarifying and also discussing some very hard issues.
Right.
Very hard issues we discuss, and if what we've been lucky where my father has been very open with criticism. We go after any issues
You tell him that you are wrong and wrong?
yes, certainly. We also argue.
No problem. Doesn't happen in the Middle East, I suppose.
No way.
So sometimes we all three of us also go. So but in the lighter sense.
Yeah.
But we have a very healthy debate. That's the most important. And also sometimes this debate, we be careful is also it could go. If you can go other ways also.
You're right.
Be very careful in these. Just that he has given us lenience to open up, but doesn't mean we can take advantage of that. So it's a very fine balance one has to maintain.
You can't exploit that. Yeah, Thomas, when we were talking about the family governance part of it earlier on, when we were chatting and also earlier part of this discussion, looking at the kind of governance practices the Jamal Group has, looking at the scenario within the Middle East with multiple wives and multiple children, army of children, and how do they manage this the governance part? And I know that there are many families which are 4 generations, 5 generations old, right?
To put it very bluntly, they don't manage it properly. That is the clear answer. Yeah, because in the Middle East, the importance I'm not saying that we don't respect our parents in India. I'm not saying that. But they take it to another extreme. I cannot imagine a son telling a father that you are wrong. It doesn't happen that you are wrong, right? But what we have started doing in some of those projects is like I have a family conglomerate, and the father started a pasta business. Yeah, and every day he has to go and run the pasta machine because that is very close to his heart, and he is doing a lot of things related to that. But he was not realizing that it is losing a lot of money, right? But when we put in the corporate governance, we even wrote in the corporate governance manual that the founder of the business is very emotionally attached to this pasta business, and we will keep running it, and it will continue to make loss. You see? So it is not trying to correct the situation, trying to adjust within the culture what is allowed, what is not allowed, but documenting things clearly so that the children doesn't go back and ask why are you running this pasta machine. We have documented, our father has started this business, he is very emotional about it, we will keep running it, it will keep making losses, for example. About multi-generation, that is what we have started seeing also is, in the Middle East, I don't know, I'm not sure whether that happens in India or not. In the Middle East, the children get into the business very, very young. They start interfering maybe when they are even 16 or 17, and they are not interfering because they want to run the business. They start to drive Ferraris and all of that because they go to the business and I want a car, the father gives them a car, so they're going in for all these benefits in life, not to run the business, right? And they actually mess up everything. So the way the governance has been decided is, there is a cut over between when you are treated as a normal employee versus you are treated like a family member. And linking it to what you said is your father forced your people to run the operation. But in some of the successful businesses, when they are forced to run the business, they are also forced to behave like a normal employee. And they have to do the regular activities a normal employee does, so that they really understand how the business runs and how businesses are being manipulated by the professionals, so that when they come to the management and they start running as owners, they really know what is happening on the ground. So the governance is more forcing them to be very transparent, forcing them to document it, and it is not by trying to have a discussion, because the discussions are never ever open between parents and the children in the Middle East. It is very respectful, and they follow instructions what the parents tell them. So it is more by right. There is one single incident I remember. We set up a board in one of the Middle Eastern companies, and we said the decision is by simple majority in the board, right? And first they worked on their own, and they were not running the board meetings properly. Then ADL was brought in to facilitate the board meeting. And then we realized that the chairman is taking the decision, the father is taking the decision. It is not simple majority, right? But then we said, okay, why don't you continue the same thing? Just document it in the corporate governance manual. Change the corporate governance manual. Instead of saying that the decisions are taken by simple majority, write in the manual that the chairman takes the decision. As simple as that. And then the whole board started functioning. You see? So it is trying to adapt and document the corporate governance. Trying to do it the right way, but if you are not able to do it, then look at what they are following and then document that in the corporate governance manual. And then suddenly the corporate governance manual becomes very important. Because now when they do this, now we have changed the corporate governance manual to write the chairman takes the decision. Now whenever they have a conflict, they say, can we look in the manual? What does it say? You see? So now they are updating the manual continuously to reflect how they should be running the business, what is the corporate governance, and documenting it and then following it. So it was a very big, what I explained in 2 minutes took 1.5 years, by the way. But now they have a proper corporate governance manual treated like, I cannot call it Bible in that country, I will taken out. And that is so it is documenting and following the process and updating the manual to reflect the actual process, and then it falls in place.
So in a sense, it's about the clarity on governance, clarity on relationship, clarity on strategy. I see there's 3 areas of clarity required as the fundamental part.
And take out the, trying to take out a lot of informal decision-making process. Yeah? Because in the informal discussions are not very transparent, it's very respectful. It's not business-oriented, it's respect-oriented. So you don't take proper decisions.
Whereas in your case, a lot of informal decisions are taken, especially when it is, when you say that the 60-65% of it is ensuring, insulating the business from the influence of outside forces, which means a lot of decisions have to be taken rapidly, quickly. So which means that you may have to talk to somebody at the top and take the decision immediately.
No,
And it may be informal as well. Entrepreneurial kind
We
of.
started with informal process, but again, depends on the confidentiality and sensitivity. We do, most of them we do formally.
Oh, I see.
But the way we work is that we, there should not be any surprise to anybody. To ensure that right from the government we, inform the other members that so-and-so thing is happening, or and also aligning with the profession. So we start with informal process. We do our start with informal process and then formalize it most of it. That's the way we work on.
I have categorized this consultation, this decision making into 3 parts. One is sharing information. I mean, I'm not asking you to involve in the decision. The decision is mine, but I inform you. The second is that I consult you. Okay, I want your inputs, but decision is mine. The third is decision making. So I would like you to be involved in the decision making. So if there is,
we have a formal process. Like we started 2 years back. Earlier was not documented. We had a formal decision making process. We have a delegation of powers, right of birth organization. Also we do have how we make the decision. That is asking, that is who is responsible, who is accountable, who is consulted, and who is informed. So we do have that process documented. 2 years back, I think it is not 100% followed, but it is in that direction. Like we, it is, I would say, 70% done. Most of the things we are going in that direction. But sometimes 30% is not done because of the sheer volume of work. But it is in the right direction which we've done. Like we have a very formal way of saying which way to decide. What is the process for?
and this occasional off-campus kind of retreats ensure that the relationships are not affected in the process. Right. Yeah, I'm going on to some of the questions we have got. We have 40